Okay, so on to the adrenal glands. So same objectives, just focusing on the adrenal gland. Now it's important to remember that the adrenal gland has two parts to it. So we've got the cortex, which is the outer part. That releases what we call catecholamines. Think epi, norepi. And then we've got the medulla, which is the inner part, and that releases a whole bunch of different kinds. So we've got the glucocorticoids, so those deal with glucose, so cortisol. We've got the mineralocorticoids, such as aldosterone, and then we've got the gonadocorticoids. So think sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen. Okay? So sometimes those are also known as androgens, just so you're aware. So we're going to focus on epi and norepi to start off with. So fight or flight, you see a bear, what do? That's what epi and norepi do. So the adrenal medulla releases mostly epinephrine, okay, and a little bit of norepinephrine. Now I recognize that in physiology I made it kind of black and white just to say one's released by the neurons, one's released by the adrenal gland, but it's not really quite that simple. But for the most part, it is. So just know majority of your what's released by the adrenal gland is epinephrine. Okay, but it is stimulated by the sympathetic nervous system. The adrenal gland is. Epi and norepi activate, target, have an effect on just about everything in the body. Okay, we've talked about heart rate, blood pressure, radius of arterioles, breathing, that sort of thing. But basically, what happens if you see a bear? And here are just some of those examples, right? So we've talked about most of these. One of the things it does as well that I haven't necessarily mentioned is that it causes glycogenolysis. That's the breakdown of glycogen. Okay, if I see a bear, I'm probably going to run. It may end poorly, but I'm still probably going to do it. Well, in order to run, I'm going to need glucose. And I get glucose from glycogen, so I break down the glycogen. It also increases the amount of free fatty acids that are in my blood because I can use those for energy as well. Now, during exercise, norepinephrine plateaus or starts to increase at about 50% of max intensity. Epi concentration really increases at approximately 75%. However, training, as you've seen with nearly all of these hormones, actually causes a reduction in what is released. Now, after exercise, concentrations take some time to wear off, right? And you can feel this, you can experience this after you've exercised, right? And there's a couple reasons why this happens that we'll talk about later on in the semester. But epi gets back to normal relatively soon. Norepinephrine takes a little bit longer. Okay, now on to cortisol. So this is stimulated by the release of ACTH, so adrenocorticotropic hormone, produced in the adrenal cortex. Also targets most cells in the body, and its job is to cause gluconeogenesis, the release or the mobilization of free fatty acids. It does the opposite of insulin. So it allows our blood glucose levels to be high or to increase them. Breaks down protein, causes vasoconstriction. It also reduces immune function. And this sounds like a terrible thing. But if you're, again, kind of think fight or flight, if I'm seeing a bear, the last thing I'm worried about is catching a virus. Okay, I'm trying to get away from the bear. I have bigger problems, literally, than a virus. So during exercise, I have high levels of cortisol after intense exercise. Remember, cortisol is a stress hormone. Exercise is a stress, so it makes sense that I would release the stress hormone when I'm in a stressful situation. Okay, but this occurs after, so 30 to 45 minutes after exercise, I have high levels of cortisol, and there doesn't really seem to be an effect of training on cortisol levels. The last one that we're going to talk about today is aldosterone. So this is the one mineralocorticoid that we're going to talk about. It deals with, you guessed it, salt. Okay, and so it's stimulated if I have high potassium, low sodium, low blood volume, and or low pressure. This is also produced in the adrenal cortex, and it targets the kidneys. Why the kidneys? Well, that's where I get rid of salt. And so if I've got low salt, I'm going to tell the kidneys, or I need the kidneys to know, hold on to all the salt. Okay, aldosterone causes me to hold on to salt and get rid of potassium. All right, and as a result, this affects how much water I have. Remember, wherever there's salt, there is water. So if I'm holding on to salt, I'm going to hold on to more water. The reason that sodium and potassium, like that we don't hold on to both or we don't get rid of both, is that they have opposite effects, right? So potassium is focused or concentrated inside the cell, sodium's concentrated on the outside of the cell. That plays a role as to why if we are high in one, we want to get rid of it but hold on to the other. Okay? And one of the things aldosterone also does is it causes the release of antidiuretic or hormone or vasopressin. Ultimately, if I have more fluid floating around in my body, especially my blood vessels, that means I'll have higher blood pressure. During exercise, I release higher amounts of aldosterone during exercise. Okay? Why would I want this? Why do I want to hold on to salt? Well, if you think about it, one of the things that happens when I exercise is I sweat. That sweat causes me to lose water. But that water's just not, it isn't only water. There's salt in that water. And so I'm losing salt every time I exercise and I sweat. So I'm trying to hold on to the salt, as much salt as possible. However, training doesn't seem to have an effect on aldosterone. So there's that.